All right, let's now shift our attention to the other big story. In the past few days, Donald Trump's ongoing tariff war with several countries has changed course several times. Now, Canada, Mexico and China have all been on the edge. In some cases, last-minute talks have led to concessions. In other cases, not so much. So let's unpack as to how the tariff war has shaped up in just the last 24 hours. Now, in a day, the US president had two conversations with Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. After discussions, Trump said that the United States has agreed to delay imposing the tariffs on Canada by one entire month. It was only after Trudeau reportedly agreed to strengthen border forces to curtail drug smuggling that Trump agreed to hold off the 25% tariff imposition. Both sides claim that this is some kind of a victory. Now, before Canada, Donald Trump's tariff war with Mexico had a similar outcome on Monday. Now, both decisions came just minutes apart. Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum announced that she and the American president had reached common ground. Once again, Trump's bargaining chip with his Mexican counterpart was linked to the issue of immigration and drug trafficking. Now, the Republican leader agreed to hold off on the same 25% tariff after reaching a deal with Claudia Sheinbaum on border security. Now, the Mexican president has agreed to deploy 10,000 National Guard troops to its border with the U.S. Back in 2019, Donald Trump had used the same tactic at the end of his first term, and Mexico's then administration had sent about 15,000 soldiers to the northern frontier to avoid tariffs from the United States.
With Mexico, and we had President Sheinbaum is a woman. I like her very much. We've had good relationships, but we have to stop fentanyl from coming in, whether I like somebody or not, and we have to stop the illegal aliens from coming in. Other than that, we've agreed to talk and consider various other things. We haven't agreed on tariffs yet, and maybe we will, maybe we won't.
But it is a different story with China. Washington announced 10% levies on Chinese imports, and Beijing, of course, retaliated. Now, the East Asian manufacturing giant has said that it will impose tariffs of 15% on imports of coal and liquefied natural gas from the United States of America. It's also announced about 10% tariffs on imports from the U.S. of crude oil, agricultural machinery, large displacement vehicles and pickup trucks. Now, the White House has said that the U.S. president will speak to his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping in a few days' time. Earlier, China had said that the tariffs imposed by the United States were a clear violation of the World Trade Organization's rules and filed a complaint. Now, China's ambassador to the United Nations, Fu Kong, has warned Washington that Beijing may be forced to take countermeasures against Trump's actions. The question, of course, is what bargaining chip does Donald Trump have when it comes to China? All right, now to give us more perspective in terms of what is Donald Trump's strategy when it comes to the issue of tariffs and how successful is Donald Trump's tariff diplomacy has been. We're joined in this broadcast by Ms. Johanna LeBlanc, who is a political analyst and a national security law analyst and also a foreign relations expert. She's joining us live on this broadcast. Now, Ms. LeBlanc, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Beyond. Now, this is something that is going to be watched and talked about a lot, probably all through Donald Trump's presidency. Earlier, it was tweets and tariffs with which Donald Trump used to run his foreign policy. This time round, it's something similar. He had said that he'll impose tariffs on Canada and Mexico, but last-minute negotiations, he said that there were concessions that were made, and therefore it is a sort of victory. But how long will this, this way of doing business with Canada and Mexico go on? Because he said that this is an issue that has now been postponed for another month.
Well, in the case of Mexico and Canada, while I do understand that there is a need for the U.S.'s partners within the Western Hemisphere to do a bit more to help address the flow of illegal migration in the region, as well as the fentanyl crisis. However, the American people voted for Mr. Trump partly because of inflation and essentially a failed economy. So I think that imposing tariffs on these countries was not in the best interest of the American people. As you know, when tariffs are imposed, the cost has to be passed on to somebody, and that somebody is the consumer. So you're talking about the possibility of goods such as beers, right?
We'll talk about how inflation would be impacted. Ms. LeBlanc, we'll talk about how this will impact inflation for the American public in just a bit. Stopping immigration and stopping the drug trafficking that is making its way through Mexico makes sense. But what is coming to America from Canada, and why is Canada the receiving end of Donald Trump's tariff war?
Well, in the case of Canada, it's also a fentanyl, and it's also the immigration issue as well. Folks crossing the border over to the U.S., as you know, U.S. shares border with Canada. But the studies shows us that the numbers are not that significant when it comes to Canada, right? That's just a fact. But I think when Mr. Trump imposes these tariffs, beyond the economic impact, what happens is that it also creates an unpredictability in the market. And consumers, one of the things that not consumers, rather, investors, one of the things that they look at when they're investing in a country is there certainty? And now countries have to reconsider, because at any given moment, Mr. Trump could impose tariffs for any given reason.
All right. Now,
but
very quickly, Ms. LeBlanc.
As a negotiation tool.
Right. Interesting. Now, the tariffs for Canada and Mexico have been put off for the next month. But in the case of China, tariffs have been imposed. The Chinese have said they'll, of course, retaliate, which means all the goods that are brought in from China into the United States of America, their prices will go up correspondingly. So Donald Trump's voters would have voted for him to bring down inflation. But by his tariff war, he's sparking a spiral of inflation for the American public.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in the case of China, I don't foresee China backing down as fast, and I don't see China going into negotiations as fast with Mr. Trump. As you well noted earlier, China has already filed a complaint against the United States government. So it's going to be a long-term negotiation. But as we know, China has other partners around the world, and China has increased its footprints across the African continent and across the Caribbean, which is a priority for the Trump administration, to ensure that China is removed from its back door, following the Monroe Doctrine and so forth.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Ms. LeBlanc, for joining us and getting us that perspective there.